So I hope you're all finding a lot of value in these presentations. I certainly am, and I should already have all this value, but this has been a terrific afternoon. And we're getting to the home stretch. I think we're regaining some of our schedule here, so I really appreciate you for staying. I said at the beginning of the afternoon that the urban sustainability movement is moving so much more quickly than other sectors like power and agriculture and so forth. And it's really quite extraordinary when you kind of see all the things that are going on today that we're reporting on. And so we wanted to have an opportunity to talk to somebody who's been inside this movement for quite some time to get some insights from them. So we have with us today Garrett Fitzgerald. He wrote a foreword for our book. He, for 5 years, was the Sustainability Program Manager for Oakland, California, participating in ICLAI, which is an international organization of urban sustainability managers. And now for several years has been one of the driving forces in USDN, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which in many ways is a much more dynamic and impactful organization. It's a peer group of urban sustainability managers from around North America. So I want to have a conversation with Garrett and see what we can learn about this movement. So Garrett, welcome.
Thanks, Ed. I thought a lot this morning about bringing a guitar and playing a really special song for you about climate. I remembered I don't know how to play guitar. Sorry.
What song? We can just sing it.
No, I also didn't write the song.
All right.
Sorry,
So
I thought there'd be time during the day, but the talks were actually really interesting, so I haven't quite gotten around to it.
So Garrett, how many cities around the world are now participating in this urban sustainability movement?
Yeah, movement's a good word. Well, there's, this is not really an us and them kind of thing with cities, right? All cities, there's thousands of cities around the world, and all cities are doing some things that are certainly good for the climate, whether you're, replacing traffic signals with LED lights or whatever you might be doing that you probably don't even realize are all about or have a climate benefit as well. In terms of a movement, I mean, there were 1,000 mayors in the U.S. that signed the Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement that Mayor Nichols in Seattle led a number of years ago. There are, I think, about 500 that have signed the Compact of Mayors very recently in the lead up to Paris, trying to demonstrate that there is a lot of current local interest in action. Within our network, in the USDN network, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network that I serve, there are about 150 cities that have a sustainability director or a person within the local government with a job title kind of like that, who's responsible for helping move some things forward. So I think broadly speaking, a couple hundred with climate goals, climate plans, staffing around that in the US and Canada, probably on the order of 500 or so that are working really active on this around the world.
So we talk to sustainability directors in other segments of the economy. For example, corporate sustainability directors can work for several years to get permission to put partly recycled paper into the copy machine. They're having trouble getting real sustainability done in big corporate businesses. We talk to people in sustainable agriculture who are having real trouble fighting back against the industrial food model. And yet, it's extraordinary how much progress sustainability directors in city governments are having. It's just extraordinary. And it's certainly not because cities have nothing else to worry about or have unlimited budgets to throw around on sustainability projects. So how do you account for the tremendous amount of traction that cities are giving to sustainability directors to start making changes?
Well, I think it's because they have so many other things to worry about. Because we see ultimately at the local level, we're more about results than rhetoric, right? And it's local leaders have a very firm grasp on all the things that, the problems that they're facing in their communities. They've got lots of ideas and a lot of urgency to make progress on those problems or to make quality of life better in their communities. And I think we've seen just today, thinking about the example we just heard about the utility in DC, and thinking about the pictures we saw of the improvement when bus rapid transit came in, and you saw that there are so many other reasons to do the things that we've been talking about today. And local leaders get that. Every decision they make is made in context of that. So we're looking for, how can I make it easier to get around? How can I make it safer in my community? How can I help people in my community save money? How can we try to create some more local jobs around some of this work where the climate thing is frankly the co-benefit. It's not all this other stuff. The other stuff is the reason you do all this work, and climate becomes the co-benefit, I think. So, you know, this is, at the local level, they're focused on taking some action, and I think that does play out very differently than it does at maybe other levels of government, or where you're a little bit further removed from the everyday challenges that we're really working on here.
Well, I mean, tell me a little bit about USDN, the Directors Network that you are working with. We've seen today that things are happening all over the world to a different degree, and yet what seems to be accelerating the process is the tremendous amount of collaboration that's happening between cities. So it seems to me that your organization is really a collaboration organization, and you develop some really powerful ways of solving problems with cities in a collaborative way. Can you describe some of the things that you do in your organization to promote collaboration?
Sure. So USDN, we're a network. We're not an organization. You know, we're not an organization that studies cities or provides services to cities or has individual kind of connections with cities. We're literally, let's create a space for local government folks who are working on these challenges to get to know each other and to talk with each other about whatever aspects here that are of interest to them. Stay out of the way, enable some collaboration. This group has been around for about 7 years. It started right around the same time that I started my previous job, which was with the City of Oakland, managing the sustainability program there. And it's really interesting. I mean, we've got sustainability directors, you've got staff in these kinds of roles who, you know, I think on one hand represent a piece of the cultural transition that's happening in cities. The very existence of somebody whose job is not to deliver any particular functions, but inherently to kind of be an internal change agent, to find ways of moving forward on the kinds of things we've been talking about today, is itself really interesting and some good progress. But inherently, some of us who kind of knew each other in a few different cities when I started in Oakland realized that we were mostly working in isolation. You know, that you get some exposure to good ideas. If you don't pick up the State of the World book this year, your opportunities for learning about some really cool stuff that other folks are doing and being inspired and being able to think about which of that is relevant, you know, what might we be able to apply here, is limited. So we said, hey, let's get together. And back around, I think it was 2009-ish, Daryl from the Summit Foundation, who's here, I know was there at that time. Some of us said, let's get together in person. Let's see what we can get out of just talking with each other. And about 60 of us met in Chicago, all in these sustainability or climate kinds of jobs, all in cities within the US and Canada. We had a lot to talk about. We talked about building energy efficiency and green infrastructure and zero waste and the gamut, and said, wow, we got a lot out of this. We should really do this more often. So we decided to form a formal network. That's when the Urban Sustainability Directors Network was born. It's been around for 7 years, and it's evolved quite a bit. So now there are about, I figured you would ask this, so I don't have a formal presentation, but I did bring a couple of slides just in case. So there are about 150, give or take, cities and counties around the US and Canada that are members of this network. Every year we have an annual meeting. Every year we throw a bunch of topics on the wall, the virtual wall, and we say, who in the network wants to talk with your peers in other cities about what? We list a lot of topics. And wherever a critical mass of cities want to talk about the same thing, there's a group, there's a peer learning group declared. So lots of safe spaces that are for city government staff only from various cities to get together, where they're talking about building energy efficiency strategy, they're talking about green infrastructure, they're talking about climate adaptation planning, they're talking about how to enhance equity within the work that they're doing, they're talking about electric vehicles and urban forestry, and on down the line. There's a website that these folks use, kind of like a Facebook-style site, a private site where they every day post questions exclusively to each other and answer each other's questions. And every single day that happens, we make them go through the site to get access to the materials for all the phone calls that take place in the network for all of these kind of thematic groups. So folks kind of have to interact, and anytime they post a question, 5 other cities will answer their questions. So I can say, hey, who's a consultant worth hiring in this? Or has anybody adopted a policy to deal with this that I could see? And they can really quickly engage with each other. That, for me in Oakland, the access to this group of peers that, frankly, I became good friends with because we were going to an annual meeting, together. We got to know each other. We had a beer together. I knew that these folks, if I had a question, these folks will call me back. And they're doing the same job I'm doing, and they've got nothing to gain from whatever we talk about. And there was a really nice opportunity to engage with thought partners. And beyond the kind of question and answering functions, they realized they could do some more things together. So there are a couple of additional things that happen within the network where we've moved beyond kind of the connecting that happens in a successful network into aligning and into producing new knowledge together. So a lot of those thematic groups realized, hey, we're all stuck at the same place. None of us can get access to energy data for the buildings in our communities. We need this to be able to adopt smart energy efficiency programs and policies. Let's work together on how we could get there, and we'll strategize together. A bunch of folks said, hey, let's share some more depth of information around, what kinds of performance are we seeing in green infrastructure projects in our communities, and let's be able to make it a little easier to all access this. So there's a lot of examples where folks in the network are now engaged in collaborative projects together. We've had a really fortunate situation with a number of philanthropic partners have essentially said, we are interested in investing in cities. We want to see progress happening in cities. Maybe one way to do that, instead of inviting cities to apply for funding to all of us, will be to essentially invest funding in some pots that the cities can govern, the cities can access. Let's make them responsible for self-policing what are the really good ideas. So there's a pot of funds for innovation where cities in the USDN network can get together and propose, hey, we think we've got a really good idea. We want to play this out a little bit more. They can apply for a grant that way. They can apply for funds to get together to strategize about common problems. They can apply for funds to take, I want to take my 5 green infrastructure folks from Oakland to Baltimore to see what they're doing. I could apply for funds to do that. So there are ways that the philanthropic community has really honored the energy and the intelligence of this network of cities, and is saying we're going to invest in the work that you all are doing and help a lot of that work move forward faster.
Cool. One thing that came to my attention a year or two ago is that I noticed there's a city that made a formal pledge to reduce their greenhouse gases by 80% by 2050. And despite the fact that, as we've discussed today, cities are under tremendous pressure to grow. They can't avoid the fact that their populations will continue to grow, and yet they made a pledge that 35 years in the future, regardless of how things played out in their future, despite climate change, despite population growth, they were going to reduce their greenhouse gases by 80% based on a baseline year that's already passed. And then I started to realize that it was really more than one city managed to make this pledge. And by now, how many cities have made this pledge?
Oh, I think it's on the order of 100 at this point. I think there was a report that CDP and somebody did early, I think around December of 2015, that I think found 90 cities globally that have made a pledge of 80 by 50 or fossil fuel free or carbon neutral. It's defined a little differently in different places.
And Washington, D.C. is one of those cities.
Yep.
Yeah. So describe to me how your collaboration network is working to help cities imagine a path to reach a goal like that.
Yeah, sure. So actually, I thought you might ask about this, so I brought you a slide about it. Folks don't know about this. You got to check this out, the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance. So this is essentially one of those many subsets of conversations happening between cities within the USDN network. This is a group that is also co-hosted by the C40 network, a lot of the larger global cities that are working on climate together. And this is exactly what you're talking about. These are cities who have made that kind of an ambitious pledge. Some of them 80 by 50, some of them carbon neutral, some of them fossil fuel free. But they're all aiming to hit that goal by 2050 or sooner, and some of them much sooner, especially folks in Copenhagen, for example. And these are cities, there are a lot of other cities that have also said, we're working on climate toward this kind of end. But there are really a small number that are actively figuring out how they're going to get there, and I thought we saw some stories earlier in the day about a couple of these. So this group formed about a year and a half ago. We've had a couple of meetings bringing together these cities that have these really ambitious targets to talk about what do we see. This is transformative work. This is absolutely, there are many cities that are making incremental progress toward these kinds of goals. trying to get as far as 80% from a carbon standpoint, this is a whole different animal. And it clearly requires fundamental redesign to a lot of systems in our cities, the way we deliver energy and transportation and manage waste, et cetera, all the things that we've heard about today. So the things I think that may be really useful for this group, we worked with some folks, this group of cities, and USDN co-hosts this alliance. So this is kind of a closed door network for cities that have these really ambitious goals and can show that they're really working on it. And we did a scan of all of the plans that they've written so far. So these are all folks that have drafted out some concept of how they're going to get there, and those vary a little bit. And there are some clear themes that emerge when you're thinking about energy supply and how we're going to get to the deep energy retrofits in existing buildings, and how we're going to get towards zero waste, and how we're going to get a lot of folks out of cars and electrify everything that's still on the road. There clearly are some fundamental building blocks. We worked with a group called the Innovation Network for Communities to do this scan of all the draft plans, and they've put together a framework basically pulling all of the ideas from those existing plans into one framework as a starting point for the rest of us. What have we learned? What is common about the way folks are thinking about the path to 80 by 50? That framework you can go grab and I put the website up here, that's carbonneutralcities.org. You can grab the framework. You can see a lot of examples. So similar to USDN as a whole, again, some philanthropic partners have been very generous to invest in enabling these cities to work really innovative problems. How do we get to extremely deep energy retrofits in existing lower income housing where we don't have to move anybody out of their homes, and we can make a lot of other improvements happen in the property at the same time and do it all in less than 2 weeks? They've piloted something like this in the Netherlands. This is an idea London's actively working on right now, some other folks in this network. Oslo's trying to figure out how do we get all cars out of the downtown by 2019. Boulder's looking at and we heard the story about could we take over our utility infrastructure. So there's a lot of really interesting stories, and you can kind of keep up with the stories that are emerging from this group via that site.
It's just so impressive to me to hear about this, and so encouraging. I mean, I wish I would have somebody up here telling me that utilities have banded together to reduce their carbon by 80%, or food production companies have banded together to reduce their. I mean, it is really an extraordinary goal, which is one that we're all shooting for, because cities today generate a lot of carbon, and in the future, as more and more people move into cities are going to become more responsible for even more carbon. So this goal is just extremely impressive. So one last question, Garrett, would be, if I'm a sustainability manager for a city that's part of your network, how do I know how I'm doing? How do I measure my progress?
I got it right. I guessed. There you go.
I was guessing they were going to ask me the question.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So there's a lot of answers to that question. I think as a field, we are very good at recognizing. Someone earlier noted that it's much easier to recognize problems than it is to come up with the solutions, and I think that's obviously true. And we're much better at trying things than we are at evaluating really meticulously how well they worked, which is always a challenge to layer on. And oops, I've given you some slides that are set to move. I apologize. So one of the tools that we're using as a field to try to understand how much progress are we making and what's this all adding up to is called the STAR Community Rating System. Full disclosure, I'm on the board for this organization. But this is a tool that we developed. It was first released, I believe, in 2012-ish, where it was written by a group of cities around the U.S. This is a U.S. tool, and I think it has some application outside as well. Similar to the story with LEED that we heard earlier, where we asked the really hard question, what does urban sustainability really mean? If you were to kind of capture the universe of what we believe this means and what is worth working on, what do we need to be making progress on, we tried to capture this within the STAR Community Rating System. This is a framework that includes, this works, 7 kind of fundamental goal areas: built environment, climate and energy, economy and jobs, education, arts and community, equity and empowerment, health and safety, and natural systems. So that's how we drew the buckets. And we came up with a whole lot of metrics that we can use in each of those buckets to kind of measure how are we doing. Includes about 100 or so performance-based metrics and 400 or so actions that we've realized are meaningful. Even so, in many cases, it's very difficult to actually measure on a community-wide basis, are we making progress? And the best proxy that we have is frankly looking at, are we taking the actions that we collectively know to be meaningful, and we can measure that way a little bit. So there are about 50 cities that have gone through this, that have subjected themselves to this process and have been certified now around the US. The momentum around this is building pretty rapidly. A lot of USDN cities are part of that group and are part of the process of continuously evolving this. So as we see other metrics that are worth including here, this is kind of this is a framework that moves over time as we all come up with better ways to measure and tell the story. But I think this is a really useful framework as we think about how can we more objectively, recognize how cities are doing, aggregate information about how cities are doing to the point where we can learn from that. Hopefully we can see some connections in here between who are the cities that are doing very well from a performance standpoint and what actions have they taken and how fundamentally is that different from the cities that are doing less well, and what does this tell us about as a field about where we should be making investments. Clearly another tool for our toolbox that we're pretty excited about.
How many cities are participating in the STAR framework?
I think 50 have gone through the certification process. More than that helped to write it, and there are dozens that are kind of in the pipeline right now. One of the things that we're working on right now that's been really interesting is this is an intensive process. There's 500 metrics in here that you need to evaluate. Have I done something on this, and think about do I want to document that, and it can kind of all the points add up to hit the gold level or silver level, blah blah blah. That's a lot of work. That's something that we think is really valuable and important, and it's something that folks probably won't do all of every year. So there are a group of cities that are involved with this right now that are working with the team at STAR to identify a much smaller subset of metrics that we feel like these are the core 20 or 25 metrics that tell the urban sustainability story that ideally all cities in the US, all cities perhaps more broadly, would report on every year, and where we make sure that we're really kind of on the ball, and we're able to do, I think as a field, we're able to aggregate a lot more information and learn a lot more from the exercise. So the hope would be that hundreds of cities will be participating at that level within the next couple of years.
It's amazing the intellectual property you're creating that future cities joining the organization can benefit from. It's amazing. Yep. Thank you for coming here today, and certainly thank you for what you're doing for the movement. It's extraordinary what you're doing to drive this movement forward. So thanks for coming here today. I'm going to turn the mic over to Garrett to do some final questions.
I have a question that you didn't have a big value chain, and I'm wondering if you're getting cities organized around saying we're going to have a joint purchasing requirement on 75% recycled paper, and sort of using the power of purchasing to drive coordinated changes in sort of signaling the industry around product performance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a really good question. And for those that didn't hear, we're asking about whether or not the cities are working together, thinking about how can we use some of our leverage as a group to affect the value chain up the chain. There are places where that's happened. LED streetlights comes to mind, where there are groups of cities that band together and try to do a lot of work at the same time and get a better price, right? There's these kinds of collaborative purchasing. There have been a lot of conversations about this at a deeper level, and they mostly have not gotten very far yet. I'd say they mostly haven't evolved past a good, interesting conversation that's recognizing the potential, largely because there isn't a lot of bandwidth to pick it up and drive it. And this is a place where, so this is my role with USDN. You've got all these cities. These guys are interested, subsets of folks in this group are interested in, if you're from an organization that works with cities or could help move something forward, there's a group of them that are interested in that. And I know who those people are, and I would love to work with folks in this room who have some bandwidth to help engage with a bunch of cities and provide some opportunities to help kind of convene conversations like that. I'm happy to try to play that bridge.